I'm Stephen Foskett here at our special Tech Field Day event with HPE's ProLiant team in Houston. We spent the entire day learning about ProLiant innovations in the latest generation of servers. We talked about power and cooling. We talked about AI and vision. We talked about security. We talked about server management. We talked about edge computing. All of these topics, though, whenever this happens, we always get some ideas coming up about the industry as a whole. And that's what we're going to talk about on this Tech Field Day roundtable discussion. So let me kick this off. I don't know who wants to be the first victim, but what I would love to know is, what did today tell you about the state of the industry in 2025, the state of the servers and compute industry in 2025?
We're at a huge crux. There's a lot of change going on. It's been building and building. We're not at the plateau yet, but it shows that the R&D that HPE has done has made a difference. And they're being able to adopt their hardware to the evolving workload demands of use cases that we've expressed. So there's good there, and we need to continue to see how they do that and what makes it better for the customer.
Yeah, so I'm Jack Poller with Paradigm Technica. I think that I agree with Vong, but I think if we take it a step further, it's really, the premise originally was, do servers matter? And I think HP shows that not only do servers matter, but what you're doing from an HPE and ProLiant is, it's not just about the hardware, it's not just about a box, but it's about the entire ecosystem, lifecycle management, the particular use cases, what you're running on the server, where it is, if it's in the data center, if it's in the edge. All of those things actually matter. And there's a whole lot that's going into what used to be commodity and generic server development that is now no longer commodity and generic. There's a lot of specialization depending on the use case and where it's going, what it's doing.
Yep.
Yeah, Guy Courier with Futurum Group and Visible Impact. I think that's right, Jack. One of the interesting developments in the industry is this sort of diversification of processing, where duties that were handled by the CPU. I mean, we've had GPUs forever, but now we're seeing other processing units, which I won't name except for one, which is the ASIC, because that's what ILO is.
Right.
And management duties, security duties that are really critically important. Especially, what was really enlightening was HPE's use of GreenLake and ILO for management at the edge.
So
and for dealing with the problems of management at the edge, where things are remote or in special operating environments or what have you, through the use of this piece of hardware on each one of these individual boxes. And I think that this is an enabling factor for more capabilities in the workloads under more conditions, closer to the data, closer to the use of it.
Well, my question is to the group is, who's pushing the edge of innovation? Is it the software or is it the hardware?
Yes.
And because there's always a matter of catching up with each other, because, algorithms are software, but, how does your hardware support, or vice versa? You're maximizing that.
Well, I mean, the hardware is usually, grown faster than the software. Software will always, the hermit crab analogy, right? It'll grow into its shell. But even within the hardware, I think that's now been sort of segmented, right? You've got NVIDIA, who's really outstripping the industry. They're growing faster than everybody else can handle in every segment, right? So now, HPE and companies like HPE have to catch up, have to keep up with those guys. And, it's really straining the entire supply chain going all the way back, going from, from a heat perspective, from a power perspective, going back to the data center side, the entire way. But the software part, quite frankly, I think it's the more fun problem to solve, because you get to code and have outcomes, and there's certainly no shortage of software companies out there that are doing a lot of this stuff. Probably too many choices, right? And it's one of the reasons that I think a lot of these pilots aren't getting to market.
I think it's more than just hardware and software, right? So we're at this point where there's a lot of innovation going on with both, but we've also got processes where they want to automate all of the coding. They want to they being the typical they, right? There's this push to automate the coding, the development of software. There's a push to automate the deployment of the hardware resources underneath of it. And overall, this is just going to be my typical answer with AI in general. It's a lot of hype too. I think we kind of saw that today. The hype is saying you should be able to do this. And of course, we saw slides that were HPE plus NVIDIA, which is great that they're partnering together with this go-to-market that's going to make it so easy to do AI. Will be all good. What AI? What use cases are you solving? I agree that it's a workload. Okay, so let's figure out how to manage for this workload. Let's figure out how to create the proper infrastructure for it. But what are we building? We're leaving out, when we talk about AI and the software, hardware, we're leaving out the whole idea of how do you get the data ready for that? And right now that requires people that are not getting paid for the data, the work that they're doing, not really getting paid. You have to do that on the back end of when you do the inferencing to clean everything up. So AI is a business process. It is not, it's a workload that runs a business process, but there's a whole lot that goes with it that includes more than hardware and software.
So you used a term that, and Glenn used it, it was the first times that came up in our discussion. HPE used it exactly once, and that is the outcome, right?
Yeah.
We don't do AI to do AI. We don't buy a server because we're buying a server. It's all in order to get an outcome,
yeah.
right? And that's part of what I'm driving at is AI is just another workload that's helping us achieve an outcome. For a long time, the technological development was entirely software because we had more than enough compute to do what we needed to do, right? Now we've gotten to the point where the software is using enough compute. We need to do more on the hardware. And so now hardware is now innovating in hardware again because we need to, because the use cases are pushing us there to get the outcomes we want. My point in our previous discussion was that outside of certain use cases, outright performance is not the metric people care about, right? We've had a discussion earlier today about power, right? And how we used to buy data center space by physical space. How many square feet do you need? How many racks do you need? Now we buy it by how much power do you need? Because we're dense enough. We've solved the density problem. We haven't solved the power problem. When you look at inferencing workloads, the performance metric to get the outcomes we need is not raw computing power, but it's things like latency or power consumption because we're in an edge location with low power, right? So there's all these different factors that come into play where a hardware ecosystem makes sense. And that's where I think I heard from HPE that it's not just, I'm not just selling you a box, right? I'm selling you more than that.
Well, I think to Gina's point though, right? She's talking about this is a lot more than just the hardware. It's more than the software, more than it's all the different pieces. And if you really look at an AI outcome, right, there's so many layers of it that have to be achieved, right? I mean, even in the different kinds of software and the hardware and the things that they have to run on, that what I think we're seeing, and I think it's necessary, and this goes to answer, I think, your question, is, why would I go to an HPE for this, right? And I think what you're seeing is that you're seeing a clumping of these layers, right? HPE sells hardware, and so they're going to have to work with those people adjacent to their layer in this stack, and they're going to clump together and work to deliver layers in clumps as you go up. Because if there's let's say there's, I'll make up a number, 40 layers of different things as you get from all the way down from the data center all the way up to the client access layer 7 of the last application that touches the client, right? And there's all these things in between, right? A customer is not going to be able to buy and integrate every single one of those layers themselves, and they're going to have to purchase bundles of pre-integrated, verified stacks of technology, including, in this case, HPE, it'll be NVIDIA, it'll be some of the ISVs that maybe they've validated with and created certain configurations and t-shirt sizes of that can be consumed that might take 10 of those layers and squash them into one consumable. Then you've got those other layers on top. And those other layers all include process too, by the way. I'll include that up there because that has to be included. And that'll be like things that global systems integrators and some of the consultants deliver. And they'll have to clump together too but I don't think they've done that yet. And I think it's one of the problems with customers getting to successful outcomes on this is because they can buy the technology. I think the bottom layers of this have done a good job of delivering technology that can do this. It's everything that's on top of that I think has not coalesced into something consumable and that can be deliverable to a client that they can just get to happiness. And so right now it's the Wild West. And so nothing's getting completed.
Maybe what's happening here is that the injection of this new workload, AI, has such a disruptive force, or a disruptive effect, I should say, has such a disruptive effect that there's a fair amount of confusion about what to do. How do I upgrade? What do I upgrade? Is it more on the hardware side? Is it on the tooling side? Is it in the abstraction layers? Is it in my orchestration layer? I mean, yeah, well, yes. And Jack, your point is just perfect about how there are many elements here, and there's so many ways to define requirements outside of performance.
It's not as a chat robot.
Yeah. Well, if we could just buy everything that we needed 100% all the time, I suppose we could just buy up all the capacity and performance we needed. But we're not in that world.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe that one of the nice things that we saw from HPE today is this multidimensional approach. There's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, and there's a lot of different layers at which they operate. It was interesting to hear that dichotomy from them about hardware versus software when a lot of what we saw today had to do with software.
Yeah.
And I want to put ILO in that category too, to a certain degree, because it's an ASIC. It is essentially a hardware package of a piece of management software. It just has that advantage of being attached to the node and going where the node goes.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think one thing that HP showed us today too, one of the best sessions I thought there was the security session. And it might be because I'm a little biased, but I thought it was really good. And he talked a lot about the coming quantum requirements for if you're working with the federal government. So it's not an easy job to be an OEM hardware vendor. It takes a long time to produce. It takes almost a decade to go from conception to delivering a server. And the gentleman was kind of talking about how they pulled in the dates, the requirement dates from the government from 23 to
2033 to 2027.
Yeah.
27.
That's right.
And that's huge. It's a big deal, and they're working on that already. And so you push that back down to the customers. That's going to impact customers. The whole quantum thing will impact customers at some point in time. So you've got this hardware vendor trying to deliver all this stuff right now in collaboration with their software partners and their other vendors to provide solutions for AI. On the top of, underneath of them, different regulations and things changing. So I give it to them for that.
I just thought it was really interesting, referencing the conversation that Gina was just talking about, that, and by the way, that security session was amazing, but they're hyper focused on what's going on inside that box, which they need to be, but they seem to have forgotten a little bit about, what's coming into that box that helps that box operate under optimal conditions. And and some of that data is just as important. And so I look forward to seeing them expanding that perimeter, but that illustrates the complexity of the whole AI chain stack, as I was calling it before. This multi-layered stack is that everything's going to depend on every other stack, and everything's going to have to communicate and talk to and secure all that stuff too, right? We didn't really talk about the security going all the way up that chain at the record level for things like GDPR later. I think this is a very, very complex, string ball that they're going to have to deal with, the customers. This is not for the meek.
I agree with you. It's not for the meek. I don't think that they were ignoring it or.
I wasn't being pejorative about it.
No. But I think as a designer, you have to put a fence around what you're designing. You can't build the whole thing. You can't build the whole world at once, right? And so we were talking to the hardware team who was responsible for that particular thing. It is a software and hardware. It is an ASIC. Actually, what's really interesting is it is custom silicon. It is not an off-the-shelf part, which is a very important part of the security, and also we talked about on the back channel of the supply chain, right? It's if you're buying commercial product, you can't guarantee that commercial product over time doesn't change. If it's yours, you can guarantee exactly what's in it at all times and deal with any other the supply chain issues. You can, if your silicon vendor goes away, you can move that. You can take your own design and move it to somebody else, right?
Oh, yeah,
And
no argument on
guarantee
that.
security,
It wasn't
right?
an argument. It was,
No.
I'm looking forward to them looking past the box.
Well, I think they did with, and that's part of what I asked is I think they did that with the is it COM and OpenView and COM is
OneView. OpenView is the very old product.
It's gray hairs. That's the right. That was the one that I did. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, well, today was a 35,000 foot view of an elephant, and that's what we saw. And with the hardware, with the AI, with the security, each company is going to be different for what they do. And they talked about how that it was the case between manufacturing and medical and anything like that. But they're an all-in-one solution, and they got to look at that whole view as an all-in-one solution. There's never going to be the only case study we saw was during the security. We saw whoever that was and his failed attempt, and where he got, what was it, malware or whatever. And so we saw a lot of stuff. I was pretty impressed with how their different solutions from big enterprise to small business to remote business or anything like that. Excuse me. And then I was also impressed with the fact that they're looking at what ultimately is going to happen to an enterprise between the air cooling and the water cooling, because that's something that regular PCs are doing, and so enterprise needs to put that into the factor. And so I think they're just creating an all-in-one solution, so somebody can just turn around and say, this is what I'm going to buy because they have this, this, and this.
I just want to give HPE props since we were talking about it's not just hardware and software and that sort of thing for the security approach. It was, I mean, they talked about provenance, where a chain of custody essentially for what, Stephen is installing in his server room. With an understanding of every potential vulnerability point and how that is being addressed. So it's not just this piece of software on a chip. It's not just a management software. It's also how is it secured in the factory? How is it secured in transit? How is it secured in delivery? How is it secured in build? That was impressive.
Yeah, I agree.
I would actually say more important than that. We had a quick discussion about how would you distribute, and could HPE distribute boxes on your behalf in an edge case, right? Where you have 1,000 locations, right? What really impressed me with that conversation was not so much his answer, but was the very first thing he said was, it depends on how secure you want to be. And it is unusual for particularly a hardware vendor whose roots are really hardware to put security first. And I thought that is really, really important. That the very first
was the first of their design principles.
First of their design principles, and it was the very first words out of his mouth was, "Well, how secure do you want to be?" Not sure. I'll wherever you want boxes, I'll give them to you, right?
Yeah.
And so that I think is the security first design. A lot of companies say that they do that, but this really made me feel that it's not just a slogan. It really is security first.
Another thing that engenders trust and makes you feel sort of better about working with them was that was just one example of a lot of trade-offs they talked about.
Yeah.
So they were not, and they didn't use the usual terminology of, without compromise or what have you, right? Or the inverse of that, whatever that is. They just were discussing, real world utilizations of their solutions. And that was one example of such a trade-off, which was to say, I believe the point he made was, if you really need to be secure, then that's not the way you want to go. We're going to want to ship it to a central point for you. But if that level of security is not needed, then yeah, we can ship direct. And then the trade-off there is speed of deployment. There were a lot of trade-offs implied in a lot of what they said, and I think that was really nice.
Yeah, and I think on the theme of trade-offs, right? They were talking about, we were talking about COM and delivering units and showing the management, right? And we asked the question about, infrastructure as code and the Terraform and Ansible stuff, right?
Yes.
And the, there really wasn't it doesn't look like they've really done that. But what they didn't say, and I'm wondering whether or not that they looked at it and made the decision willingly not to put that in because perhaps customers aren't using that as much as maybe we'd like them to or think they are. And so their customers haven't been asking them for that because you figure if they were asking them for it, they would have done it. And so it's an interesting, I thought it was a very interesting answer that you could tell they weren't very keen on getting too deep into that question of, hey, what about Ansible? What about Terraform? Because after looking online, doing some search, there really is no effort that I could see from HP to provide, Ansible or Terraform adapters for their framework. And I was like, maybe that's it. I'm not going to blame them for that because it's possible they don't see the customer need. And I thought it was a very interesting thing.
I will say this about security first. This is how I'd approach a company. If I put everything in first, then the customer is basically going to be going through my system, and if anybody else wants to come in, they got to play by my game. And if they don't, then they're just not going to play at all.
Well, it's been really interesting, and I think that as I said at the beginning, I think the most interesting part of this is always sort of the big picture takeaway that we all get from these presentations. Because you think, I just heard a bunch of people presenting on servers or storage or whatever. No, this is a chance for us to really better understand our industry and the customer requirements and where things are going. And to that point too, I would say that a lot of this stuff, now I can't speak for HPE because, I'm not sure what their corporate mission and goals and so on are. But I can tell you what, the people that we talked to today are very customer driven in that they're basically trying to build for their markets. And maybe in some cases their market is not what we wish it was, but I guarantee you that it's a big buyer because that's who they're building for here. They're building for some very important, very big companies. And over 12 generations of ProLiant, they have refined this thing. I mean, I was there for the first generation. I've seen almost every one of these systems. As Vung said, you look at these systems, they're not making minor advances. They're making major advances with every generation. I do think it's interesting that the major advance in Gen 12 is ILO 7. I mean, I don't want to give short shrift to the rest of the product line, but ILO 7 is a big differentiator, and it's all, to Jack's point, it's all about security. To sum up, the question is sort of why would somebody buy from an HPE instead of an ODM or, kind of put things together themselves? I think it has to do with this real, truly integrated approach, literally from assembling boards all the way through the supply chain, all the way to your door. They'll build racks, they'll integrate them. And yes, they do have a lot of partners that they work with. Yes, they do need to think about the software that's running on this hardware. But you can't forget that there's hardware underneath all that software. And this is a company who seems to really get that. So I really appreciated that aspect of this presentation. So if you watched this and you enjoyed this, check out on YouTube. You'll find the HPE ProLiant Gen 12 videos. Just look for Tech Field Day. Look for HPE ProLiant. You'll find them there on your favorite search engine. Or go to techfieldday.com. And thank you very much for joining us.